All right, joining us now, a longtime friend, former colleague, love him to death. He's been covering the Eagles what seems like forever, even though he still looks like he's in his 30s. Zach Berman from The Athletic joins us. Zach, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate you being here today.
Absolutely. Always good to talk to you and see you on the screen.
You are the best. So let's get right into it. Your Philadelphia Eagles that you have covered for so long. Crazy offseason. You know,
Yeah.
you lose some people, you gain some people. The losses may outweigh the gains. If you were to just summarize, Zach, this offseason as far as Eagles go on the field, how would you summarize it?
Well, right now I'd say incomplete. And frankly, that's the word Howie Roseman used too, because, some off seasons, admittedly, you get after the first week of free agency and you're like, all right, this is what the team's going to look like. And I still think there are some moves to be made here. Obviously, AJ Brown's the one we've been talking about, but the draft, the Eagles have some premium picks. So you'll see them obviously add talent day one, day two, and then I can see them post draft addressing some positions where we look at it now and we say that's a weakness, like safety. But honestly, when I look at the overall offseason, so to answer the question in a different way, I think that they're really relying on guys getting healthier. Like that's key. They're relying on the defensive players kind of continuing to progress. They've had a strong defense the past 2 years. And I think what you're going to see in the draft is really an influx of young, cost-controlled offensive talent, probably more with 2027 and 2028 in mind than 2026.
Well, to that end, where do you think things stand with A.J. Brown? Because obviously you lost Jahan Dotson. If A.J. Brown isn't in the picture, you need to add wide receivers, and you arguably do even if he is in the picture. But what do you anticipate? Do you believe A.J. Brown will be on the Eagles in 2026?
I do not. Now, as I say that, I'm kind of like the boy who cried wolf, right? So I'm trying to be careful because, if we talked about this in February and in March and, now we're into April, I still think post June 1st, AJ Brown's playing elsewhere. But you never say never. And there have been times, if we had a conversation this time last year, I probably would have said Dallas Goedert would have been playing elsewhere in 2025, much less 2026. So I suppose things can always change. But if I had to guess, and you're asking me to guess, I'm expecting A.J. Brown to play elsewhere. And you are correct about wide receiver. Now, I think internally there's a belief that there's more to Devontae Smith's game than what we've already seen. And I think Devontae Smith can step up. They obviously signed Hollywood Brown. They signed Elijah Moore. And then I think they're going to add to that position in the draft. And then we'll see what happens in the trade market as well. But really what you're relying on is, I know this comparison has been made, but DK Metcalf gets traded in Seattle, and then Jackson Smith-Jigba steps up from like a really good receiver to one of the best receivers in the NFL. And if that can happen in Philly in combination with a healthier offensive line, obviously Saquon Barkley's there, Dallas Goedert's back. I think there's a belief that the offense can still be strong, but obviously they're not saying it now because A.J. Brown's still a member of the Eagles.
Zach, you mentioned injuries, and you and I have been covering sports for a long time in this town. When seasons get over, we often hear about injuries that we might not have known all that much about during the season and how serious they were. What went into my mind when you said injury was offensive line and all that they had there. Is that the obvious, and that's what you were talking about? And are there others that maybe were more prominent during the season that we really didn't know about?
Yeah, offensive line in particular, right? That group was beat up last year. There were multiple players who had offseason surgeries, and you're missing Lane Johnson for a good chunk of the season. So when you look at all those factors, when this team's been really good, the offensive line's been really good. And I mean, it's funny in Philly, we talk about it like last year was a bad season. They won the NFC East. They were in the playoffs, right? But in years when they're not in the Super Bowl, sometimes the offensive line's banged up. And the reality is that that group is banged up. And what they're really counting on is Lane Johnson and Cam Jurgens and Landon Dickerson and Jordan Mailata playing like all pro caliber players. And so if they're back and they're healthy, this team's going to be good. Elsewhere on the injury front, right, I don't think Nolan Smith was quite himself. I don't think Jalen Carter was quite himself. So these are like ascending players who, if you get a full offseason to be healthy, and they didn't have a full offseason last year, then they're healthier going into camp. And, it was interesting talking to Howie Roseman. not about those guys specifically, but about this overall. And he said like he has so much respect for teams like the Chiefs and the Patriots who go deep in the playoffs every year, because that just, that's another month on these guys' bodies. And I think you really saw the effects of it with the Eagles last year.
Zach, one of the trends I've noticed is that there does seem to be, and maybe it's just a vocal minority, but a segment of Eagles fans that anytime there's one of these really well-sourced reports on, be it A.J. Brown, Jalen Hurts, that is immediately mobilizes to shout it down and discredit it in some way. As someone that covers the team, does that frustrate you? And how do you, I guess, keep it from affecting what is really good reporting on your end and on the end of many others?
Yeah, so a few things there. First off, number one, I wouldn't say it frustrates me in the sense that, look, if you're in the media and you're critical of players sometimes, like fans can be critical of you. Like that comes with the territory. And so if we don't want players to be sensitive, we can't be sensitive ourselves. Number one. Number two, to what you're saying about the reports, like I know it's a thing in this business where you don't talk about someone else's reporting. I'll say, because you asked the question, like, these guys are really good. The people I work with, even though they're competitors, they're really good. Tim McManus is really good, right? And I've worked with him now for, I'm going on the year 15 on the beat. He's been there the whole time. So when he writes a story, like, I know it's well sourced. I know he does his work. And the same thing, you go on down the beat, right? And so I have a lot of respect for the people I work with. But this is like the nature of covering the Eagles. It's a competitive beat. It's a rabid market. I will say overall, and I received a message from someone from out of town who was from a different organization who's like, didn't the Eagles make the playoffs last year? Right? Because it's funny that it was framed to me this way by someone during the offensive coordinator search, that if you win 10 games in with the Jets, you get a contract extension. If you win 10 games with the Eagles, your OC gets fired, right? It's just the expectations are extraordinarily high here, and I get it. But to the original spirit of the question, it's ultimately up to the readers and listeners and viewers to decide what they want to believe and what they don't want to believe. But I can say what's written from a lot of these reporters that I work with, and for me, I hope the readers feel that way too, is that it's well sourced and it wouldn't be put out there unless unless you're being responsible with it.
Yeah, Zach Berman is and I'm not just saying this because you hear Zach. When Zach came into the business, I was already in the business. We became colleagues at the Daily News and all. Zach, the all-star lineup we had at the Daily News. I mean, from all time. You, me, Eddie Barkwitz, guys that are remaining or whatever, we tried to emulate those guys to be professionals in what we do. And you just explained it perfectly. I remember when you came on having a conversation with our boss, Pat McClune, like, wow, this kid really has it. And you have. Your professionalism and how, and on Tim's question, beats are supposed to be covered is exactly it. And you're right there with everyone you just mentioned. And I say that earnestly. I don't, say that, like I said, because you're here and me. I'm honest with everybody. I just think you've done a terrific job, and it is tough. It's tough what we do. When we were on beats, when I was on beat, you're still on one. It is a tough business. But one of the things I wanted to bring up to you, and maybe I'm wrong here, but the Eagles lost somebody this offseason, and the city kind of went crazy on it. And I sat back and I was like, really? When did Nakobe Dean become the greatest linebacker in the history of the world? Now, in the few games that he played, and I believe I have my math in another book, he missed about 50% of the games he was here for. He showed flashes when he was there sometimes. He was a good leader and all that, and I like that they drafted him in the third round. I like that he fell that far. Is he getting overplayed about how good he was now that he's not here anymore, or is this a really, really big loss for the Eagles?
Well, somewhere in between, right? And what I mean by that is I don't think it's overplayed in the sense that he's a talented player who walked out the door, a homegrown player, prime of his career, and I think he has the chance to be one of the better linebackers in the league. But I don't think it's a huge loss because they were prepared for it. I didn't expect Nakobe Dean to come back because they drafted Jahad Campbell in the first round the year before. And the example I would give is it's not that much different than Milton Williams the year before, a third-round pick who's a really good player, signs a $100 million deal with the Patriots, but the Eagles they were not going to bring back Milton Williams when they had Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter and then Moro Ojimo. And that's just kind of the nature of the NFL, is that when you draft well, and the Eagles have on the defensive side of the ball in particular, you're going to lose players. And the fact if they didn't have their first round pick from last year waiting to take over, I would say that that's a bigger loss than it is. But you don't draft Jahad Campbell to keep him on ice for 2 years or 3 years, however long it is. So I think that losing the player hurts, but I think they were well prepared for it.
Yeah. Another loss this offseason was Jeff Stoutland at offensive line coach. You bring in Sean Mannion to be the offensive coordinator. What have been your early impressions, as much as you can gather pre-training camp, of the new coaching staff?
Yeah, it's still early for that, right? That they're not on the field yet. I would say losing Jeff Stoutland, the offensive line coach, really hits them hard, in the sense that I've covered the team going on the 15 years. I've seen his entire time here in Philly. He's the best position coach I've covered. And you just look at the player development that he's had. But I think that they've probably delineated between the O-line coach and the run game coordinator. And the offense is changing. The offensive scheme is changing. The run game's changing. I think they wanted a run game coordinator with background in the concepts that they're bringing in. And so I think that was probably more or less the crux of the issue here. And we'll see how this new staff turns out. I've heard great things about Sean Mannion. He hasn't coached a game yet. He's still undefeated. He hasn't called a game yet, right? So we'll see how that goes. But to give you like a firm answer on that would be premature on my end. Ultimately, though, a lot of this is going to be how the offensive players pick up this new scheme.
Zach, I'm not going to ask you about particulars when it comes to the draft. Like, I don't need to know about the second linebacker from SMU or anything like that. But you know how Howie works. As you said, you've been around this team for quite a while. Where do you think they go into this draft? What are their highlights that they want to hit? And as you said, after it's done, they're going to get some more people in here, to fill in other spots. What are the spots that you think they're going to hit with the draft?
Yeah, well, the offensive side of the ball, I'm paying close attention to that for a few reasons. Number one, because the Eagles have been so defense heavy in the first round, second round, even going in the third round during these past 3 years, that they need young, cost control talent on offense. And they did that because they knew they had all these expensive contracts on offense and that they needed inexpensive players on defense. And the plan worked really well. That's how they were able to put this roster together. Well, now a lot of these defensive players are getting paid or about to get paid, and they need that infusion of talent on offense. So that's the first reason. The second reason is that people always talk about draft needs, and this isn't popular to say, but I would say if you want to know where Howie Roseman drafts his needs, he drafts his needs for next year, right? And we just talked about Jahad Campbell. So let's say in theory, AJ Brown's on the Eagles this year. I wouldn't expect him on the team next year. But take AJ Brown out of it. Look at the offensive line. I don't know if Lane Johnson's going to be on the team next year. We'll see like what Landon does. And when I say next year, 2027, right? We'll see Landon Dickerson's long-term future. And so the Eagles need young offensive linemen. I expect that to be a spot. Young skill players. I don't think Dallas Goedert's going to be here in 2027. So wide receiver, tight end. So I really think they're going to hit those spots hard, and that's really what I'm paying attention to is wide receiver, tight end, O-line. On defense, I think they'll look edge rusher. I know fans want safety. I don't think the Eagles push safety high. I could see that in a middle round, and then maybe in the trade market thereafter.
Yeah, the final one for me. Obviously, they're not going to spend high resources on this pick, but running back, I'm kind of interested in your thoughts on. Saquon is coming off of kind of a bizarre season. You have Tank Bigsby behind him who showed some flashes. Just what do you see from the running backs moving forward? Does it become not a timeshare, but maybe a little bit more of a mixture next season?
Well, I mean, Saquon Barkley is still Saquon Barkley, I would imagine, in their eyes too, and they're paying him accordingly. And so the expectation is that he's one of the best running backs in the league. But they did give, draft capital to get Tank Bigsby, and Tank Bigsby is going to have a role. I don't know if I would frame it as a timeshare. I do think they're going to run the ball a lot. And I think there's a thought that, to have success with Jalen Hurts as your quarterback, it involves a strong running game and a strong offensive line and playing off that. So I I think they're both going to get the ball quite a bit. I think this is going to be, I don't want to say a run first offense, but it's going to be, if they don't run the ball well, they're not going to have a good offense next year.
Zach, we often hear about labels on seasons, run it back, rebuild, tanking, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
If you might be able to label this 2026 season for the Eagles, what do you think the label is?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, maybe a prove it year on the offensive side of the ball in particular. But at the same time, I think it's almost like a last ride for a lot of this offensive core, or I should say a lot of this offensive core, part of this offensive core. I mean, I would expect transition here going into 27, and that could, the offensive line. I just mentioned Lane Johnson, and tight end Dallas Goedert's been here since 2018. We'll see, long term how we'll see how many years Saquon has, and there's you go on down the list. But I think the Eagles have had this core in place that they've had crazy amount of success with since 2021, 2022. And I think that they're kind of in transition on the offensive side of the ball. But I do think it's a prove it year for an offense that underachieved last year, and that brought in a new offensive coaching staff and a new offensive scheme. So I would say a combination of those two themes.
All right, Zach, you need to tell us about Leap Year, which is a phenomenal book that you had written. First of all, tell us all about it. Tell us where people can get it. And then also, how hard was it for you to write a book? I have many sports writers friends that have dipped into writing books. First of all, what was that like for you? And then let us know the specifics about the book.
Well, I appreciate it. It's over my shoulder here. So
there you go.
So to answer the question, it's this is my third book, my second book on the Eagles covering the Super Bowl. Oh, I'm sorry, the Eagles winning the Super Bowl, and it's I realize I'm the product of good timing, in that if I were covering the Eagles for the first 51 years of the Super Bowl, I wouldn't have no Super Bowl books to write. In the past 7 years, or the past 8 years, but in a 7-year period, I was able to write a Super Bowl book twice. So like anything in life, I was more equipped the second time around than the first time around. So I knew what to expect. It's a sprint, in that it has to be finished in 10, 11 weeks, and you need to get 80,000 words in 10 weeks. And the reality is, no one's gonna it's not like anyone's gonna do it for you, right? So if I go to sleep and I don't get my words finished, then I'm behind the next page. I'm behind the next day, and it's really a testament to the phrase. It's better to have written than it is to write, because when you're in the process, you don't like it so much, but then when you go to the bookstore and you're signed books, it's like that. It feels real cool to have the physical copy. So my selling point for the book is that it takes you behind the scenes of the Super Bowl season, but it's not just like it's not a play-by-play of the season. I think you see why they became Super Bowl champions, how they became Super Bowl champions. You learn who was involved in it. Like, this really takes you from the red confetti after they lost the Super Bowl in February 2023 to the green confetti in February 2025. And so you see how that 2023 collapse really affected them. You see what they did last offseason. And then there are these cutaway chapters where you get to know who Jeffrey Lurie and Howie Roseman, Nick Sirianni and Jalen Hurts and A.J. Brown and Lane Johnson and Saquon Barkley and Jalen Carter, Zach Bond, Darius Slay. I mean, I've been in Nick Sirianni's living room. I've been to Jalen Hurts' high school. I've eaten lunch at the little restaurant across the street from Saquon Barkley's childhood home, right? And so like I'm trying to show the fan, the reader, who these people are beyond underneath the helmet, and I hope that comes across in this book.
It absolutely did. And Zach, I'll tell you, when I get around to writing a book one day, one of my books is going to be the different ways people watch sports. As a parent, as a fan, as a sports writer, as a former player, as a referee, like, people watch games so differently. When I read your book, you were nice enough to give it to me one of the times that we were together. When I read your book, that was going through my mind. Like, I'm reading this book as a reporter and appreciating Zach. I'm reading it as would be a fan and appreciating what Zach is throwing out there. It is a book for everyone. If you have someone that you're trying to impress that's an Eagles fan, Get them the book. Maybe you have a girlfriend that loves the Eagles. I'm telling you, it'll put you over the top with her. So I just, it is a great read, Zach. Really appreciate that.
Appreciate it. That means a lot.
Yeah. So Zach, thanks so much for joining us. We're going to hit you up probably some more times in the near future. And if you're nice enough to come back on, we thank you in advance. But Zach Berman from The Athletic, you are the greatest. And thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks,
Appreciate
Zach.
it. Thanks for having me on.